I'm Grim.
I'm Zolgar. That's Kaiju.
And this is Two Idiots and a Dog, Idiots on Film,
where we explore movies that we love
or think are important for pop culture.
This week, we're talking about Die Hard.
So, there are a number of reasons we have selected Die Hard. First of all, it is one of the touchstone action films of the 80s. And it covers a multitude of themes, and upon rewatching, we actually both discovered little things about it that sets it apart, makes it the forerunner that it is. And I think one of the first things that really sets it apart, especially for a modern audience, is how much of a time capsule it is.
And of course also, it is widely considered one of the greatest Christmas movies ever, so we felt it mildly appropriate for a holiday special. So, happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
Like our logo? We do too.
It was made for us by Tundra Katie Bean. You can find more of her work on her Patreon at patreon.com/Tundra Katie Bean. That's patreon.com/TUNDRAKATIEBEAN.
You can also find a link to that on our Patreon page and our SoundCloud page.
So once again, time capsule. I use that phrase very specifically because it kind of is a video time capsule of the 80s. Culture, it's such a different world. I mean, first of all, there's the tech, which... cassette players.
Car phones, man.
Oh.
You remember when having a phone in your car was a big deal? It meant you were someone or were trying to pretend to be someone.
Yep, and I never had one.
You think we did?
No.
And of course, also, there was the smoking literally everywhere. McClane carrying his gun on the plane, which, even for a cop, that is not going to fly today. Not going to fly.
I see what you did there. So, speaking of cops, total ambivalence about a terrorist threat.
Yeah, that was...
Wow. That was... And then, of course, there's the other illegal activities throughout the movie. Cocaine.
I mean, may as well have been Dr. Roxo in there. And of course, the other very 80s thing, it's an R-rated action movie. You gotta have some titties out there.
Oh, man, the titty epidemic of the 80s. I mean, there's pros and cons to it, I suppose, but sometimes it's just overdone. And
there are too many times where you can tell that they just did it because, hey, we need to have a topless woman in here. Okay, the scene in this one where they're, the guys drag two people out of the room because they were having some fun. Okay, that one I suppose works. It's a little shoehorned, but it fits. The topless poster that he goes past twice and ogles both times, not so much.
Yeah, little bit. And there's so many things in here too. I mean, it's not just the themes and the elements. And one of the things that we did touch on though was technology, and that did bring up in my mind something that I do want to talk about a little bit, and that is, especially for the 80s, these guys were high tech.
Yeah, this was a team that knew what they were doing and had put some serious time and money into preparing this, and they went in well equipped with not just as you pointed out when we talked about this earlier, some really high-end weapons for the era, but also they had some really good tech for, surveillance and things like that, and they knew how to work their tech. These were very competent villains.
Yeah, just run a quick rundown on some of the gear they were using. In addition to the high-tech drill and computer systems that they were using to crack the vault, they also had flashbang pucks, which would have had to have been handmade at that point, and these kind of look like they were, so that works out. And their armaments, all the bad guys were using Heckler & Koch MP5s, which were the Cadillac of submachine guns in the 80s. Carl uses a Steyr AUG, which, fun fact, this movie was so popular that it is credited with assisting in the popularity of the Steyr AUG in the Western market.
Which, is that a good thing? I don't know.
People have opinions on bullpups. This isn't a firearms review channel, though, so we'll leave that by the wayside. But even Gruber himself has a very fine Walther. So these guys are coming in, they have invested in this gig because the payout on this gig is worth it to them.
Which, that's actually another thing that dates this, because it was $600 million, which, don't get me wrong, that is still a lot of money today, but you stop and think about what $600 million would be back in the 80s. 1988.
It's retirement money.
It is retirement money for everyone on that crew, everyone on that crew's family.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was a massive sum of money.
And you brought something up while we were talking just now that I really want to expound on, and that is, you brought up the fact that these are competent bad guys. These are not the modern movies, hoo-hoo-hoo, chuckle-chuckle, minions. Everybody on that team, even the most screw-up person in their crew, was still a competent person. The mistakes made were entirely believable and not for comedic effect. And I think part of that comes down to the fact that the characterizations in this movie were spot on.
Yeah, they were, and I think that's all. The bad guys being competent is also part of what makes this movie work so well, because, okay, it's an action movie, we know that the good guys gotta win, but we never felt like John McClane just was guaranteed to win. At any moment, it felt like John McClane could lose.
Yeah. He was outnumbered, outgunned, and he worked his way through it, and the bad guys reacted intelligently for the most part. There were a few small mistakes here and there. Dropping the rocket ammo while wheeling the trolley.
I still think that was something that was literally an accident, that they were doing that, and the crew was like, okay, that works, we're going to keep that in. I don't think that was part of the movie intentionally.
It's possible. And the other big one is Carl has John McClane dead to rights, barrel of the AUG pressed against his head.
And he learns the very hard lesson of any action movie villain: if you have the opportunity to shoot the hero, do it. Do not try to make this personal. If you want to make it personal, I don't know, teabag the corpse or something.
Or something, I guess, yeah. But again, it's also a very human and believable error.
It is. It very much is, especially since, McClane killed his brother.
And we were shown earlier in the film that Carl is impulsive and aggressive. Speaking of his brother was one of their two tech guys. And he was tasked with isolating the phone lines and cutting the alarm systems. And as he's doing his precision work, Carl comes in with a chainsaw and just starts going to town. So it's very in keeping with the character.
And it's also very in keeping with siblings there, because you were an only child, right?
Yeah.
But me, I had a sibling. But siblings tend to be very close, but at the same time, really like to with each other.
Yeah. And it's obvious Carl was just playing, but it was also a very aggressive move. So when he later goes full ham-fisted with John, it's totally believable.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense.
There's so many of these characterizations, though, and it's not just the bad guys. I want to be clear. There's so many elements of this story that are told through these characterizations. Now, a lot of that's the writing, sure. But these actors...
The actors for this were all completely spot on.
I mean, the struggling marriage. We felt that. Bruce Willis and...
Bonnie Bedelia.
Thank you. Put in amazing work. There was all these subtle little body language things, a look across the room, plus the elements of the story itself, like her using her maiden name at work and that upsetting John.
The fact that when John first comes into town, he doesn't know where he's staying.
Yeah.
He's hoping he can stay with her, but he doesn't know if that's what's going to happen or not.
And they finally meet up, and he goes in for the kiss, and she turns her cheek.
And the really important thing there, that not only shows that that there is a love and respect there, but also really goes against the grain for 80s action movies. He respects that. He backs off and gives her the space.
Yeah. And one of the interesting things is once they're finally alone and she's not just the professional woman surrounded by her male coworkers, there are little smiles that they give each other. They do still obviously love each other, but they're starting to run into some sort of interpersonal conflict, specifically regarding her success. And while they love each other, that does not prevent John from opening his mouth and kind of being a jerk. He lets his emotions get the better of him.
Well, also, though, you look at that fight, that was not a fight of people who hate each other. The way that fight played out, first of all, it was a fight that they had had many times before, and also that was a fight of two people who truly care about each other, because they are also both so passionate about what they do that it's a clash there.
Yeah, and one of the other things that sets John apart is he's self-aware about it. As soon as she leaves the room, he's looking in the mirror going,
well, that was mature.
Good job, Jack. Way to that up, John. Not in those words exactly, but that was the intent and tone, really, as he was berating himself. And the thing of it is, I want to touch on this real quick. One of the points of contention between these two, one of the main elements of the story, is how successful she's been in California. I feel the need for our modern listeners to really hammer home how successful her boss, a
Japanese man,
asked her to give the speech at the Christmas party, to rally the troops, so to speak. For a woman in the 80s?
Yeah, because today we look at a movie with a very successful woman and we think, okay, cool, but it doesn't hold the same impact as it did back then, because at that point, the idea of women being really successful, it wasn't like completely unheard of, but it was still...
It was very unusual, especially for married women.
Which, that's also part of the point of her using her maiden name, because she expressed in the movie that, they kind of felt that, if she was a married woman, then, that would mean, she's gonna have kids or need to tend to her husband or things like that. So this idea that, she's using her maiden name, she's a single woman, that says that she can devote herself to the business.
Yeah, and while John himself is not what I would call violently misogynistic or anything, he's still a product of the era, and in the 80s, it was still the man was the breadwinner.
Yeah, John is misogynistic of the era, as opposed to the aggressively super misogynistic. There's certain movie characters we could talk about, and we will at some point.
Someday, you bet.
But, John McClane... Honestly, John McClane was more progressive than a lot of them, because, first of all, the fact that even if he wasn't comfortable with it, he, I suppose, I don't like using that word, but, there wasn't an immediate, we're done, or you're not allowed to go, you have to come home. It was, she went to California to pursue her life, and John wasn't okay with it, but he also wasn't violently opposed to it.
From what the impression we get from the conversations and the movie and everything, he has expressed his opinion on the matter, but has taken no action to actually stop her. Furthermore, the kids are with her in California, and if he wanted to, he could very easily have stopped that legally.
Oh yeah.
Especially as a cop.
Yeah, because as a cop, he could have very easily pulled some strings and gotten custody rights. Or, at very least, forced shared custody, which would mean that she can't really go to California because she needs to make sure that he can get the kids every 2 weeks or whatever.
Yeah. It's there's all sorts of little nasty things he could have done to try to stop her, and if he'd even pulled any of them, there wouldn't be those little tender moments of them smiling at each other.
Yeah.
So John is, as stated earlier, very progressive for the era, but he's also progressive as a character for the era because there's little things he does that truly make him an everyman action hero instead of the slapstick, over-the-top action hero schlock we've come to expect from an action film.
And not just the everyman action hero, but also a good cop. You know, one of the first places we see this is when when Hans Gruber's gang first raids the place. You know, McClane is in one of the rooms. He's off to the side. They don't know he's there. He's got a gun. He could go out guns blazing, take a couple of them out, and then, because action movie star, escape by the skin of his teeth and, go on to do the rest of the movie. But he doesn't. He looks out, he gets a gauge of roughly how many are there, realizes he is grossly outgunned and out-equipped, and makes himself scarce to try to find proper help. And does that most of the movie.
Yeah, and while he's doing all of this, he's gathering intelligence, he's learning names, numbers. To a limited extent, he's kind of picking up on what their specialities are as he goes. And he keeps trying to report that. And the whole time, and again, this is one of those things that sets John apart and makes him so much an everyman, is he doubts himself throughout the entire movie. He talks to himself, second guesses himself. The scene where Takagi dies.
Yeah.
Immediately after, he's like, "Why didn't you stop him, man? Because then you'd be dead too."
Yeah, he's very much self-doubting and, has this idea of, oh, well, I could have done something, and then, no, I really couldn't have, like later on when Ellis gets killed. Of course, we're set up to feel nothing when Ellis dies, but, in that moment, McClane is trying to do whatever he can to keep them from killing Ellis, and it doesn't work.
Yeah, and it just goes back to those characterizations. Ellis is a total skis bag from word go, and the actor played it perfectly.
Actor played it too well. You wanted to deck the guy.
You really did, and when he dies, you just don't care, or at least we didn't, because we're morally bankrupt.
Like I said, I do really wish they would have done something different with Ellis, because a scene like that, I personally want the audience to feel that death too. I want the audience to be going like, but I like that guy. Kind of like when Takagi dies. And again, talk about great characterizations. This man, he might have been able to figure out how to get the safe open for them, but he refuses. He just straight up says, "You may as well kill me now."
And then, of course, they do. Interesting fact, in that scene, Alan Rickman flinches because he's never really handled firearms before, and he didn't really like them. But for the camera angles and the scene to work out, they needed him to be the one firing the prop blank. So if you look closely, you can actually see him flinch.
Yeah, which is not the only time they screwed with Alan Rickman in this film.
Nope.
Another interesting piece of trivia for you. There at the end, when Hans Gruber falls off the tower, the shock on Alan Rickman's face is real, because they told him they were going to count to 3 and drop him because he was nervous about this stunt. And they counted to 1 and dropped him.
Yep.
Which is a dick move, but it does sell the reaction.
And it appears to have worked out, but yeah, it was something.
Also, one thing that I really noticed with this that, kind of ties into the characters is one of the characters that is really important to the story, the side character, Al Powell.
Mm-hmm.
We meet him, and we expect him to be comic relief. Especially those of us who saw Die Hard when it was a little bit older, because we knew Al Powell as the father from
Carl Winslow.
Yeah, Family Matters?
Family Matters, yep, with Urkel.
And so, then we see this overweight black cop in a convenience store getting a whole bunch of Twinkies, or something along those lines, and kind of going at it with the clerk, like, "Oh yeah, these are for my wife."
"Oh yeah, I'm sure."
And, so like I say, we're really set up to think that this guy is going to be an incompetent buffoon and just comic relief, and then he ends up being the only competent member of the LAPD we see, a very important character to the story, and for as little as he's actually in the story, has a strong character arc.
He does. He starts out appearing to be just there for the lulz, and then he very rapidly marks himself as, no, he's a competent police officer. In the driveway leading up to Nakatomi, he drives way better than a lot of characters in movies, or even, real people would be able to avoid that gunfire. Yeah, he rear ends himself so hard off of it, he ends up going practically perpendicular to the ground and has to drop out of the driver's seat. But he didn't get shot.
And, I give him a little bit of hell for that, but at the same time, he was being shot at and had a body fall onto the hood of his car. I don't care what kind of person you are, that is going to scare the shit out of you.
Welcome to the party, pal.
God,
Welcome to the party indeed.
The lines in this movie, man.
Oh, they're so great. And we're definitely going to touch on that in a moment. But one of the things, you pointed this out in earlier discussion with Al, is part of his arc is you learn that he's actually a desk jockey. And it's played off, it looks like it's going to be played off for laughs, because you're like, yeah, I had an accident and...
Oh, what'd you do? Run over your boss's foot?
No, I killed a kid.
And at that moment when he explains what happened, that, basically this teenager was playing with a toy gun and it was dark, it looked real, and he reacted the way a cop is trained to react.
And he chose to go behind a desk after that.
And at the moment that is said, McClane shifts gears and he's like, you did what every good cop should be terrified of doing.
Yeah, John's important to remember. John is a cop. John is a New York cop. If John himself is not that cop, John easily knows 5 guys without trying hard to think of their names who have probably done what Al did in almost the exact same circumstances. And so he's going to be sympathetic. He knows. He knows what that looks like. And it comes up again at the end of the film with a little detail that you brought up.
Yeah, so right there at the very end, everyone's kind of coming together. They're celebrating the win, and they're getting the survivors out of the building. And Carl, who up until that point we thought was dead because, McClane hung him, but, that was a survivable thing. We've discussed that previously. But, Carl comes out of the wreckage intent on killing McClane, and Al is the first one to see him and just pulls his gun and drops him. And they so easily could have played that as this whole, oh, I've gotten over my block and it's a positive thing, it's a good thing. But when you look at Al's face in that, he's holding back tears because he just killed a man again.
Yeah, it's not, oh, look at me, I got over my trauma. It's, I have learned to deal with the trauma enough to save someone else's life, but this is fresh trauma for me. Even someone like Carl, this is affecting Al.
Yeah, anyone who's worked in that kind of field will tell you that doesn't really matter the circumstances. Killing a person is not easy.
Yeah, and we see that with John too. One of the remarkable things here is our first action sequence with John isn't a shootout.
No, it is a brawl, and the death is accidental.
Yeah, they roll down the stairs, and Carl's brother lands bad.
Yeah, breaks his neck. And, again, so many other action movie stars be like, okay, this guy's here to kill me, I'm going to kill him first. But McClane is a cop. McClane wants to detain, get information, and let the legal system do its job.
Yeah, and there's several moments throughout the film where it takes John a bit to get on board with this whole action hero gig, because even his early gun kills are, the table.
Yeah, the table where the guy comes in, and he's trying to get the guy to surrender, Then the guy's buddy comes in and ends up in a gunfight. McClane kills the buddy that came in because open fire and just reflex. And
happens to get the kill shot.
Then, the guy's chasing him on top of the table, shooting through the table, and takes a moment to taunt McClane at the end of the table of, if you get a chance to kill somebody, don't hesitate.
McClane shoots up through the table, and the thing is, with those angles, there's still a good chance those shots wouldn't be lethal. In this case, though, they were very lethal.
Honestly, that angle, the fact that where that would hit, that's actually a very high chance of being lethal, if not instantly, very quickly without medical attention, because that was hitting upper legs, so there's a good chance of hitting something that will bleed out fast.
Yes and no. Definitely upper leg hits, very potentially lethal. But the angles involved in the blind shooting, there was no guarantee John was going to hit the upper leg or even any of the torso section. It's very feasible those shots would have gone straight up through the foot or the lower leg, and that was it.
I think John knew better than that based off the angles that the shots had been coming from, because you figure where the guy was standing, John wasn't firing straight up, he was firing at a slight angle, so I think John had an idea of roughly where he was pointing. But
still, doesn't mean it was 100% lethal intent.
But
John definitely didn't shed any tears over the guy, though.
Well, his response was, thanks for the advice.
Yeah. And really, in many ways, that is a turning point for John, because from there on, he's just like, okay, no, these guys are 110% all business. If I try to play softball, I will die.
Yeah, and he goes pretty serious for the rest of it.
Yeah, there's so many elements to the film, so many little details, and then we touched on it briefly earlier, and we said we'd come back to it. Dialogue.
Yeah, there are so many pieces of dialogue that are amazing. Including there's one thing that I meant to bring up earlier, which is kind of that Chekhov's gun that we see really early on. We think it's a throwaway line of the guy on the plane with McClane. He's like, the secret to surviving air travel is when you get where you're going, you take off your shoes and socks, you walk around barefoot on the rug, and make fists with your toes.
Fists with your toes.
And McClane does that when Holly leaves, and is like, yeah, that feels really good. And that's when the gang comes in. So McClane spends the entire movie barefoot, and the only chances he has to get shoes, they don't fit. Which, that's another great piece of dialogue.
9 million terrorists in the world, and I gotta kill one with feet smaller than my sister. Interesting side fact real quick. We never meet that sister in the entire rest of the franchise.
Which is amusing, but
and weird.
Don't give them any ideas for Die Hard 6. Please. Please?
Hollywood, are you listening? Please?
Do not make a Die Hard 6. Please don't make a Die Hard 6.
Make a Die Hard 6.
But, then where where we actually get the payoff for this is, when McClane's really been making a nuisance of himself. He's taken out quite a few of them. He's made all kinds of problems for their plans. And they've got him pinned down in an area with glass walls everywhere. And Hans Gruber, who earlier saw that he was barefoot, and, McClane even makes the crack about it, better than me caught with your pants down. Gruber's just like, shoot the glass.
And the fact of the matter is, that delivery, that line, and the other movie, that's your dialogue. That's your meme phrase right there. But this movie has so many. Another one of my favorites is, and my notes here for you, the audience, literally reads, iconic line with an iconic delivery. Now I have a machine gun. Ho, ho, ho.
And, of course, no talk of Die Hard's dialogue is complete without yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker.
And it's great how it's used, because first it just comes about organically, because Hans and John are talking on the radio, and what do you think you are, some sort of American who's watched too many Western films, blah blah blah. I was more of a Roy Rogers guy, as they start naming off actors, which actually segues into John later using the radio call sign Roy. And like, whoa, what are you going to do now, Mr. Cowboy? Condescendingly just referring to him as Mr. Cowboy. Hey, motherfucker. Then later, Hans turns it around on him.
What did you say to me? Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker.
It's great. And again, any one of those in a normal movie, that's your meme line. But there's just so many.
And of course, there is one other that could have easily been the meme line. All your posturing, and you're just a common thief.
I am an exceptional thief. And since I'm upgrading to kidnapping, you might want to be a little more polite.
And of course, the other thing that is so great with all these lines, especially Alan Rickman's lines, but really all of them, but Rickman delivers his lines with that just trademark dark, dry wit that these lines are not comedy, but the way he delivers them is just priceless.
Yeah. Again, iconic line, iconic delivery. Almost like half a dozen other actors would have been given the role, and that particular line, the machine gun line, would have been like, now I have a machine gun. Ho, ho, ho. Just with frustration because one of your guys is dead. Whoever did it is taunting you. They took his stuff. You're really frustrated. No, that's not Alan Rickman's Hans Gruber. Alan Rickman's Hans Gruber is cool, calm, collected. Oh, one of my guys died. Well, that sucks, but we're still in control here.
Now I have to go tell his brother.
Yeah, that was the main point of irritation. And I think the reason it was a point of irritation is because he knew how Carl would react, which was going to just send ripples through the plan. The plan. Hans Gruber's holy writ was the plan.
But at the same time, you do note that Gruber's control of Carl was enough that until Carl was face to face with McClane, he followed Hans's orders and stuck to the plan because he knew that the plan was worked out, that his part had to be played, and if his part wasn't played, the plan could fail, and then it would suck for everybody. You know, it gets thrown out the window when he's face to face with McClane, but that's the point where he sees this and is like, this guy killed my brother. I have to kill him.
Yeah. And honestly, we could sit here and we could banter about Die Hard for hours. And actually we previously recorded a note session where that was easily an hour of us just talking back and forth over our notes in this movie.
And then there's the first attempt at recording this with the bad audio.
Yeah, it's been interesting.
This has been an interesting venture.
Yeah, but before we go, one thing we do need to talk about, one thing we need to touch on.
Which one's that?
That Die Hard is the greatest Christmas movie of all time.
You know, we've had this argument before. I don't feel like having it again. So I'm just going to say, you're right to shut you up.
Victory! But I'm still going to expound my thesis.
All right, fine.
So this time watching it with notes, because I've watched Die Hard several times throughout my lifetime. I'm a child of the 80s. The thing is, this movie starts with all the classic tropes of a Hallmark Christmas special.
You watch a lot of Hallmark Christmas specials, do you?
I'm not dignifying that with a response. But no, seriously, you've got the strange marriage. He flies out on Christmas to patch things up.
With a giant teddy bear for the daughter.
With a giant teddy bear. And then gets blocked by outside interference. Typically speaking, it's a rugged, handsome, potential other love interest for her. But in this case, Alan Rickman
is a rugged, handsome, common thief.
Exceptional thief. But yeah, it starts off like this could just be a Hallmark Christmas special with all the romantic cliches thrown in, and the fact that he was a cop, carried a gun, might have not factored in at all. And then the movie immediately goes, oh, by the way, terrorists.
No, if it was a Hallmark movie, him being a cop carrying a gun would have factored in because he would have started out being like hyper machismo and posturing at the hot new guy, and would have pulled his gun on him at some point because, well, that's my wife. You know, yeah. Not that I watch Hallmark Christmas movies either.
Uh-huh.
I blame my mom. It's all her fault.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, overall, I also have watched Die Hard a few too many times. It is easily one of my favorite action movies, and it is one of the greatest action movies ever made, and is also responsible for some of the worst action movies ever made.
It really is.
Some of which star the same actor.
Yeah, Bruce, you doing okay?
I've some of his I've watched on Netflix. Oh God, if we get to those,
Oh, we will eventually, because
we're idiots.
that's it for this week. Thank you for listening to Two Idiots and a Dog.
If you like what we do, you can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/TIAAD Media.
That's TIAAD Media, all one word. If you want to send Kaiju fan mail or reach out to the idiots for anything, you can email us at tiaadmedia@gmail.com.
Again, that is tiaadmedia@gmail.com. You can also join us on Discord. Links can be found on Patreon in our email signature and on our SoundCloud page.
We would also like to give a special thank you to all of our patrons on Patreon. If you want to hear your name included here, you can support us at the Honorary Idiot tier on Patreon.